The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to Urjanet's webinar on reducing building operating costs with energy data. We're thrilled to have such a fantastic panel for today's session. I'd also like to thank our regular webinar attendees. If you've joined us before, welcome back. And for our new listeners, we're glad to have you with us. My name is Eric Becker, and I'll be moderating the event today. And joining me is Chris Happ, the CEO of Gobi, and Jerome Montrone, the Senior Vice President of Beacon Capital. I'm really excited about the session today. This should be useful for facility managers and anyone else who uses energy data to support energy management or sustainability initiatives. For those of you that have tuned into our webinars before, you'll notice that today's session will be a bit different. We're going to start off with some open discussion around our webinar topic today, and then we'll get into live Q&A. If you're familiar with the TED Talk series, you'll probably recognize the format. As we go through the session, we'll be sure to talk about the role of energy data in reducing energy consumption and get feedback from our panelists on how they use energy data to drive improved building profitability. To those of you who submitted questions for our panelists, thanks for your input. But it's not too late. Please submit new questions at any point during today's session, and we'll do our best to answer them. Also, following our session today, we'll send each of you a copy of the slides and a recording of the webinar. We'll also have this session transcribed and available next week for download as part of our expert Q&A series. And with that, I'll turn it over to Chris to tell us a bit about his background. Go ahead, Chris. Actually, so Chris, we may not be hearing you. Jerome, are you able to go ahead and provide us some background
Yeah,
yourself?
I'm here. Do you want to skip Chris and come to me? And
Yeah, why don't we go ahead and do that, Jerome? Why don't you provide a little background for the group?
Okay, so I work for Beacon Capital Partners. For those of you who don't know Beacon, we are a private firm that owns and acquires Class A office space in major cities around the country and in London and Paris. We currently hold about 35 million plus in square feet of office space and greater than 60 properties. I currently oversee the sustainability and energy programs for Beacon's entire portfolio. We have completed, I put down 60, I didn't actually do the count, but we've done at least 60 lead projects over the last 5 or 6 years, including a number of platinum properties in the US, and then the tallest building in France, which was among sort of the few of buildings in France that had achieved LEED at the time a year or two ago. We developed our own proprietary energy savings programs at Beacon for the most part. We've been doing it for years, and over the years we started to incorporate other data collection and analysis packets and packages to help support what we put together. We've done an amazing job, if I may say so, at reducing our emissions and our energy costs. We've been awarded several, 3 times in a row now from Energy Star's Partner of the Year and Sustained Excellence Awards, as well as some others. I also happen to run or be the program manager for Beacon's construction properties in programs in New York. And I have been working on one of the buildings that had some damage from Superstorm Sandy, and the outcome of that was a lot of analytics and understanding of how we could make our building better. And ultimately I got asked to be appointed, or was appointed on a mayoral task force specific to the Commercial Buildings Committee. It was a very interesting program where we ended up with 33 actionable proposals to the city to strengthen buildings and to protect the residents for the next potential coming events.
Okay, that's great. Thanks, Jerome. We're really lucky to have you on the webinar today, especially with all this going on up in New York City and the efforts they're taking to reduce energy use and greenhouse gas emissions. You may have seen the announcement over this past weekend that New York City is planning to overhaul energy efficiency standards for all its public buildings, and they're going to put pressure on private landlords to make similar improvements. This initiative is part of a pledge to be announced at the start of the United Nations Climate Summit in New York City today to decrease greenhouse gas emissions by 80% from 2005 levels by 2050. New York City is the largest city in the world to make this commitment. So, Jerome, I'd love your thoughts on this announcement, and please weigh in on what you see happening in New York City to make buildings more energy efficient.
Well, first, I applaud Mayor de Blasio for bringing this issue to the spotlight. Certainly, the timing is terrific, and with the Global Climate Initiative Summit and the Climate March going on, and it certainly has got some political components to what he's doing here. But I think overall, it's a very ambitious plan. There's many benefits to the city, environmentally, obviously, but as well as the way he's kind of directed it, which is to ultimately reduce energy costs as well for people living in lower income, which is that I think he believed, he called it a regressive tax or something. He's trying desperately to kind of to both handle it from a global and environmental standpoint, but also, as Mayor de Blasio does, to bring it to the people. So I think as I looked at it, there are some big hurdles, as with always this type of proposal, where it comes to costs. The city itself, there's been estimates that it will cost upwards of $1 billion for the city to retrofit and to improve the buildings that it has in its portfolio. And then on the private side, it's going to hit the residential and the commercial owners. I think that one of the trains of thought when this was brought up before was that we would look for more incentives and ways to help offset some of the bigger costs that would help make this goal a reality. Things like when you get to that type of reduction, you're talking about chiller plants and some bigger capital costs with respect to larger, especially in the larger buildings. So I think what would come of this would be people pushing back for incentives and ways to offset the direct costs. Those are things in the past that have been challenging to push through, but we're hopeful that the momentum that's now being created on a global scale will help bring some of these to fruition.
Okay, that's
just one more note, which is that like a lot of the other cities in the U.S., New York City is a mandatory benchmarking, and I think that's been a really great. It's really had a great impact on the city because it's had a wide sweeping requirement and push for people who didn't really think about energy savings historically, sort of in the smaller and mid-size property level, who now really kind of have to think about it. And I think all of these things come together to really make things better. So I'm happy that this has come about, and I'm optimistic that it's going to make some great changes.
Okay, that's great, Jerome. And then, Chris, if you've been able to join us again, feel free to comment on this or provide the group with some background on yourself. Okay, we'll move on. Now I'd like to share a quote from one of our previous webinars. This quote came from Alistair McDougall, an analyst from Verdantix, leading industry research firm. And he says, if data is the foundation of all analytics, then energy data is the foundation of all energy management decisions.
No.
So how can we use energy data to reduce building operating costs?
Yeah, you're not on. You better get in. Okay.
In a moment, I'd like to ask the panelists to comment on this. We're also seeing rapid. Go ahead, Jerome.
Sorry, go ahead. I'm sorry, didn't mean to interrupt.
I was going to say that we're also seeing, and I think you're an example of this, we're seeing the rapid adoption of Energy Star Portfolio Manager, which requires building owners to capture and report on energy data on a monthly basis. It's currently being used in buildings that represent over 40% of the commercial office space in the United States. And we're also seeing rapid adoption in schools and universities and hospitals. And Jerome, as you pointed out, and I know the same is true for Gobi, that you guys have both been awarded Energy Star Partner of the Year. So we're hoping to get some comment from you on this as well.
Yep, go ahead. I don't know if you want me to comment now, but I'll throw in, we use Energy Star across our portfolio. We're very committed to it. Like everybody is, but I think the granularity is not quite there yet. And while it gives us something that a lot of other types of data doesn't, which is comparative analysis, which we love, and it certainly helps to motivate different buildings we have in regions where other properties are doing much better, or they're seemingly falling below what we consider an average. It falls a little short on the data side in that aspect.
Okay, that's good comment. And then I think one of the things that we've observed is that a lot of this energy data is typically captured using manual processes. And of course, we all know that's prone to human error. So, Jerome, I don't know if you've experienced any of that, and have you comment on that aspect of collecting energy data?
I would say 100%. We have historically, when we developed our initial programs, we were collecting all the data manually. We relied generally the sort of senior people are not doing this work, and sometimes it falls in the hands of people who don't have the proficiency in what is on the statements and understanding multipliers and even more minutia of the billing. And so we found that there is absolutely a complexity to this, and ultimately, if you can't rely on the data, it creates, due to human error, I mean, it creates a lot of wasted time in analysis and, frankly, in discussion when you're trying to understand why something is not where it should be, or how to improve it.
Okay, that's great. And then, of course, one of the other things that we've observed is that it takes a certain element of subject matter expertise to understand an energy bill. And I know our customers run into a problem where accounting people are trying to understand the bill and capture all the relevant data associated with it. But when an accounting person is looking at a bill, they're looking at it very differently than an energy manager would, and that sometimes leads to inaccurate or incomplete data. And Jerome, you might have some experiences on all this.
We do. We find that, and not to reiterate my last statement, but we find that when you don't have data that you can trust, if you have people putting in the wrong data, if you have data anomalies, those are the things that we're looking at. With the adoption of more data, which is over shorter intervals, normalizing data, things that you can kind of do different types of analyses with, it really throws off what you're looking at. So it is extremely important that we get the data correct, especially as we're getting into more and more amounts of data analysis. I find that there's typically omissions, and there's typically incomplete data sets, things that are really kind of causing us to have to work harder to get to answers and to understand what's at the bottom of any particular issue.
Okay.
Jerome, can you guys hear me now?
Yeah, we can, Chris. Do you have any comment on this?
Yeah, I'd like to add. So one of the things, and I think this is a great point, and one of the biggest things, the pushes that we're seeing for adoption, particularly from an owner like Jerome in our platform, which is sort of this notion of how do I make statistical or predictive or intelligent analytics decisions based on a whole complete set of information. So we kind of have this notion of what we call dark data or siloed data. It's kind of easy to say big data is this giant data set, but what we're kind of historically finding was that owners would have a portfolio or a region or a city that tracked data in Excel, maybe in one case, or in a system in another case, but they would track the data in different ways and not normalized the same way as Jerome mentioned, and not looking at kind of the same pieces of information. So what we're really finding is that people are kind of creating the most value from a portfolio view of this, where they're tracking exactly the same thing. We don't have these silos of data. It's not on somebody's machine. It's really sort of this cloud-based view at this data, and then we can normalize across the set, compare and contrast information in the data set, and we start to find some really interesting things that you might not have seen otherwise because you didn't have enough data. There weren't enough data points. I couldn't, for example, compare a building in California to one in Toronto, normalized by systems and people count. And so really kind of the next wave of this is getting all this data, now that we have tools where we can pull it more cost effectively, getting it all into a single place where I can start to make some predictive analytics and more intelligent decisions with energy, but also water, waste, other kind of sustainability items.
Okay, that's great. Thank you, Chris. And then, Jerome, we've seen this. I'd be curious to get your comment on it, but that is just the challenges associated with different billing cycles that you get from different vendors out there.
Well, we have found that the different vendors, first of all, there are challenges in getting data alone, as everybody knows here, depending on the locale and the utilities, and in some cases from tenants directly, and that causes all kinds of inconsistencies. We're trying to report from different sources, and we're trying to both put on the same platform what same set of data, what these different sources have spit out, and make sure that they're accurate, and then ultimately, from a timing perspective, make sure that they meet up. I've found that the billing cycle issue ultimately results in a timing of collection issue, and it slows down your ability to look at data, and the delay in looking at data results in ultimately looking at old data, and looking at old data makes things more challenging. Depending on what you're looking for, it can make things more challenging to find anomalies and different problems. Just as an example, if you have data that is on a different billing cycle, you can't get a complete look at a building or at a set of buildings in a region. It's hard to make comparative analysis. You might be into a different season. You might go from summer to a shoulder season, and that changes dynamically the information you're looking at, and it puts you in a situation where you're no longer able to go back and figure out exactly what you would have wanted to correct during that season. So those are some of the issues I think that we deal with typically when it comes to errors and timing.
Okay, that's great. And then, Chris, you might be able to comment on this. This is just the issue that we hear about time and time again, which is missed opportunities resulting from incomplete data.
Yeah, it's an interesting question, and I think I'll start with an example, even on that sort of leads in from the previous slide and Jerome's comments, was sort of the timeliness of data. We have several customers that sort of are stuck in this billing cycle where they get a manual or paper invoice mailed to them. It's due net 15 from the date it was mailed, and by the time it goes through sort of this approval process in a manual sense, it's late every time. So we're looking at $3,000 to $5,000 penalties each time. Well, I think there's a value to be said of just from a pure accounting standpoint, getting this data and looking at it and able to kind of optimize how we're looking at it and paying for invoices. So I think in the base case, there's some savings and opportunity there, and sort of some cost avoidance just from having a single place to have this, a single place to link to every single bill I might have. That way I can track it down from an accounting perspective. But what I think is really interesting is we start to dive into the data and start to compare normalized information. It's one thing for me to say, oh, energy's up this month. Well, maybe there's a various set of reasons, or maybe that's okay based on the actual happenings in the building. One of the things I had our team pull sort of information based on Chicago buildings versus Texas buildings in their performance this summer, because there's been sort of this mild summer in Chicago. And what we actually find is that the buildings in Texas, even though they use quite a bit more electric, are operating quite a bit more efficiently on a normalized basis than they are. And what we sort of found is that the operator behavior of these buildings, when we kind of dive further into it, is such that I think a lot of the buildings were designed for more heat, which is sort of intuitive in Texas. But as you get these sort of hot and cold days in a milder summer, you start to get sort of these strange operating patterns, and you can't just run the building the way you might have planned to based on last year and set it at a certain set points because it's changing on a daily basis. And without data and the ability to kind of scale that across a platform, I might think those are anomalies. But when I can start compiling those and say, yep, as a general trend, or as this event happens, I notice this result, then we can really kind of hone in on behaviors that we want to look to correct. And a lot of it is not investing in systems. It's kind of opportunities you can identify via looking at this data, and really then kind of fine-tuning your sort of dashboard, or in our case, a dashboard to consume this information, and really start to set alerts and understanding points that, based on what's in there, might signify opportunities for improvement. But without all of that data, we couldn't run enough analysis to suggest that these are real opportunities or just kind of operating anomalies.
Okay, that's fantastic. And then, Jerome, I think this would be perfect for you to comment on. I mean, you guys have a portfolio that's scattered all across the country, and really a couple things come to mind when I think about the challenges that you might have. One is, how are you dealing with, all the different data from all the different vendors coming in different formats? I imagine that can be a challenge. And then also maybe you can think of some examples of where, where problems have occurred because you haven't had the right data.
This is probably one of the most challenging areas that we find, and what we've ultimately done is to look to companies like Gobi and like yourself. We find that trying to consistently pull data and have it be accurate across our portfolio, given that we're in 9 cities and 8 utilities, and we would ultimately like to compare this data from building to building, so that we can then go out not just to look at buildings that are deficient, but to reach out to our property managers and to our tenants and enroll them in programs where we can create competitions and again also normalize the data so that they're, a building who's slightly less efficient, as Chris just mentioned, might be able to compete with a building that's more efficient but still have sort of a handicap, so to speak. So those are some of the issues that we found are helpful, and what, as I said, what we've turned to really at the end of the day is using Excel sheets and using Energy Star data collection, trying to create our own databases is really is not at a point when you get to this level of diversity of cities and locations and types of buildings that you ultimately need to turn to a data collector that can help us with that. And we found that we're able to go to properties now, like I said, and really put forth to them, this is your region, this is the type of data that we're getting from other buildings in your region that have a similar type of infrastructure, similar age buildings, et cetera, and put it in front of them and create a lot of visibility both for them and for us. So we found really ultimately at the end of the day, turning to a company that does this professionally is really the best way to overcome that issue.
Okay, that's great. I appreciate that comment. And then also another issue we've seen out there is just the time lag associated with waiting for bills to come through the mail and then go through the process of manually trying to capture that information and report on it. Perhaps, Chris, you can comment on some of the challenges your customers have had in this area.
Well, yeah, and I'll echo the comment I had made before on just purely from an accounting perspective and getting it through the approval process because of the size of the bill. But I think as we get further, and I've sort of seen this evolution where it was sort of Excel-based tracking, and then we move into this cloud-based tracking at a monthly level, which gives you great access to data. So if you're, in a base case for a reasonable cost, I can now start to know 15 days, 10 days after the end of the month how my building operated. So there's some great feedback points there, especially when it's normalized and operators can, as Jerome suggested, kind of understand what their peers are doing and look to share best practices. And then certainly we see we're adding more and more of this incremental data, and as the utilities are more and more capable of providing these 15-minute interval data, the ability to pull and consume that and give you not necessarily real-time feedback, but in most cases at the next price point up or the next tier of data collection up, you can start to hone in further. So I really find there's based on the operator's role, you might say the property manager or an asset manager or sort of the business user cares about this data on a monthly basis, and that's probably frequent enough. And then as you look more at the engineer or the building operator, they might start to say, that's great, I've fine-tuned my performance, and now I want to take it to a more incremental level where I can know every hour, every 15 minutes what's happening, so I can start to fine tune some of the operational best practices that I'm putting in place.
Okay, thank you. So, as we said at the outset, the goal is to reduce energy consumption. And so this all starts with access to good consumption data. So these are some of the challenges faced by energy, facility, and sustainability managers. So how does Urjanet factor into all this? Well, Urjanet's the world's first provider of big energy data as a service. Our mission is to deliver the big energy data that organizations rely on to make smarter, more profitable, and eco-friendly decisions. Urjanet is a data-only company. We don't provide software applications or any kind of analytic capabilities, and we don't provide energy management services. We focus solely on the difficult problem of providing our customers with a reliable stream of energy data. The Urjanet platform connects to thousands of energy sources, including nearly 1,000 utility providers across North America, and our data provides value across the entire organization. We feed this information in near real time directly into our customers' applications for accounting, procurement, energy management, and sustainability reporting. Our solution consists of 4 subscription data service products. The first is Urjanet Utility Data, which provides our customers with all the information from the utility bill and a copy of the bill image itself. Urjanet Meter Data, which is a cost-effective way to capture interval or smart meter data. Urjanet Weather Data, which is weather data from 4,000 certified weather stations, along with a building sensitivity index. And then finally, Urjanet Alerts, which is a data service that provides our customers with notifications to billing and usage anomalies. I'd also like to bring your attention to our Spark Energy Conference, October 8th to 9th, here in Atlanta, Georgia. This is a place where leaders are going to come together to discuss innovative solutions to energy challenges. So please look at our website for more details on all this. So that's a bit about what we do. I want to thank everyone again for submitting questions. We've got a whole raft of them. So why don't we go ahead and jump into our live Q&A session. And Chris, I've been handed a question here that I think is really directed at you. And that is, the question says, I'm curious about the methods used to acquire and analyze building data. Can it be done with an Excel spreadsheet set up for an external data connection?
Yeah, I thought the question was going to be why couldn't you figure out how to talk for 20 minutes? So if I understand the question, so can we do this in Excel? What are the methods of capturing and analyzing the data that we use in our platform? And can I do this in Excel as another way to do that? Am I summarizing that correctly?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, I'm kind of reading the question here, and that's the way I'm taking it as well.
Okay. Well, let me start with the latter piece of the question, because I think what I've primarily seen is that, and Jerome, in starting with you guys have created a pretty sophisticated set of macros and Excel-based tracking. And I think that's where most people start. I think I've read that Excel is the most commonly used database in the world, and is probably where most of these ideas are hatched. Internally, our team, anything that's done in Excel, we're looking to get into our platform. So anything we're routinely doing, any manipulation we're doing in Excel, we end up saying, you know what, this is great. I've sort of conceptualized this idea and this analysis methodology. It gives a great sort of drawing board for that. And then we want to automate the logic of that into our platform. So I do think Excel is a logical starting place. Where it falls short is all of a sudden I start tracking on different spreadsheets. I track on different people's computers. The freshness of the data comes into question. Someone somewhere inevitably adds a column or interprets a field differently and starts tracking different data in a field. So when you really want to take it to the next level, I think Excel is a logical starting place and a great proof of concept. But I really think we're starting to see people move into the cloud and adopt that, and really start to look at that as the common platform across the country with which, or internationally with which, you could share this information across an enterprise. And then not to mention kind of the social features in a platform like ours or many of the other ones out there where I could share best practices amongst my team or within the community of users. So I might say, I'm doing a parking garage lighting retrofit. Who has any ideas on the type of bulbs I might use, or do LED work, do motion sensors work on that? And the ability to kind of share that information that you can't do in more of a static platform like Excel would be. As far as the analysis that we're doing in our interface, so basically as we load data, we'll take it through a series of checks. So I want to validate the quality of the data when it comes in. Is there a huge spike from the bill last month? Was the recycling rate abnormally high than what I would have expected? So we basically have put some tolerance around this information to eliminate, I think the automation piece that we're doing eliminates a lot of the data entry errors we've explored earlier, but we really want to also use some logic and intelligence to say, did something happen that would tell me that this data is incorrect or signal me that I should look at it further? And then from there, we can start to work with organizations. We've built in sort of our best practices of what we would look at and think that we would want flagged on a building. Abnormal energy use will flag when precipitation is high from the weather data, and also the irrigation water looks high. We would flag that as, hey, something's going on. We shouldn't be watering when it's raining outside. So things like that we can automate and start to bring to your attention rather than having to look through something like Excel and try to find that. The other thing is that's great about a platform and a community is that as we roll out a great new analytic back-end piece or a great new report, we publish that to the entire community. So if you have some Excel whiz sitting off in a building in California who's created all these great reports and charts, a lot of times we find that knowledge isn't shared with the organization. So we have a consistent platform to look at this. We can then push that analysis to everyone for everyone's benefit.
I wanted to add to that, Chris. I think you referenced us in this, and we did start with a very simple Excel spreadsheet and built on it, and you mentioned some of the trials and tribulations that take place through that experience, which were dead on, which is collection and people adding lines and timing issues. But ultimately, what we found was that we were putting an enormous amount of energy at each property, but also at the beacon, at the parent level, into collection of data and verification of data and fixing the ones that are not incorrectly, and that by the time we got everything done, it had exhausted such a large amount of time that our time for analytics was minimal. And so allowing someone or an agency or a group that could do all the organization, that could put that right in front of you, allowed us to make decisions at a high level and to do analytics from many different levels and to really gain more from the data as opposed to kind of wading through it and trying to understand what it is before we even have a chance to do it. So I think switching, if I look back in retrospect, and the world was a different place 5 or 6 years ago from a data collection standpoint, but I think had I started that today, I would definitely start directly with an organization that had the ability to gather data, make it seamless to bring in front of you as well as other people that you work with in your organization that may or may not be in the same office, and to help you potentially analyze the data. I think it's, even at some cost, it provides a lot of value in that you're not spending time doing that part of it.
Okay, great.
Yeah, Jerome, that's a good point. Did you guys ever, we estimate a property manager, let's say, or assistant, or someone at the property in real estate might spend 2 to 4 hours a month doing this. Did you guys ever have any analysis on that? I'm just kind of thinking this out loud as far as like how much time people actually spend doing this.
I have not done the analysis, but I can tell you it was a considerable amount of time, both at my level, and it was time. Not to mention, I mentioned taking away time from doing doing other things like budgeting or dealing with tenants and things. So I can't answer that, Chris, but it was an exorbitant amount of time, and we did it on a quarterly basis. So it also happened to come at a time where we were trying to do budgeting because everything had to come together at once, and that in a way overloaded the teams at these properties because they just had this whole other layer of things that we now expected them to show us.
Yeah, we've been trying to estimate it. And I was hoping you had an answer because we need it for our marketing materials.
I don't know, but you and I can sit down together and I can try to come up with something.
Maybe one of our someone in our audience has done that analysis and they can share that with you. In which case, I'll announce that at the end. So that'll be an interesting exercise. Uh, let's see. There's a couple questions that have been directed at Urjanet. I'll try to tie this all together in one response. But we've been asked, how do we know that the utility data is accurate and audit ready? And someone else has asked us if our data includes cost rate, tariff, and usage information. And maybe the best way to answer both those questions, is by reminding everyone that our innovation is really to do with how we've automated all this. And so there's really no great way to ensure that data is accurate or that you're getting all the data from the bill when you're depending on manual processes. Our real trick is that we've automated this. And so given all the challenges that we talked about in collecting good energy data, really using the computer as a tool to do this is the way that we're able to ensure that our customers get absolutely everything that's on the bill, in some cases as many as 125 data elements, along with a copy of the bill image itself, and that the data is accurate. Let's see. I think this is an interesting question. There's been a number of questions that are similar to this, Jerome. So let me target this to you. To what extent does energy data help you simulate the performance of equipment retrofits and the related cost and ROI? This is a great question.
Well, it's a difficult question to answer quickly. From a very high level, I would say that it provides a management tool for us. So where in the past we would rely on analysis primarily at the property level, usually generated from the chief engineer, working its way through the property manager, and then ultimately into Beacon's hands as the asset manager. We would have to rely more heavily on what the property is putting forth for, not for the cost, because the cost we could kind of back up, but what the impact is on energy use relative to what that property is spending, and what the costs are at that property and the infrastructure there versus other properties. Now, given that we have visibility, we can use that as a decision-making tool when we look at, for example, real-time data of when the building starts up in the morning and ends at the end of the day, and during different times of the day we normalize it to weather, and we could figure out a lot of times what the impact is of a chiller turning on and off, or generally large amounts of equipment. Sometimes it's lighting. It depends on the type of sub-meters and the type of data you get, but generally we now have a decision-making tool that will help us with a lot more precision identify what an ROI will be, or what a payback period will be, and that gives us more confidence in making these decisions, especially for a company like Beacon, where we don't necessarily hold buildings for 20 or 30 years, and we have to think a little bit more about the short-term payback. So I think it provides a whole new world of analysis, and it creates a lot more accuracy in understanding what the cost savings will be.
And Eric, if I could add to that,
yeah.
One of the things that we're starting to track in our platform, which I think will be incredibly powerful from I'll say a crowdsourced perspective, is that every user, every building, every project in our system can be tracked. So if I have a building, if Jerome were to take one of his buildings and they did a lighting retrofit from T12s to high output T5s, and we'll track that project in our system. We'll track a cost to doing it, and as best we can. Now, it's not perfect if you don't have sub meters on the exact piece of equipment or lighting or what have you that you changed, but we're going to track that in the system such that we have a database now of hundreds of thousands of measures that people took, and you'll have a ROI that's generated to building type, building systems, where it was located, and the types of things that happen. And it starts to give you a pretty robust database of what works. If you wanted to say, all right, I'm looking for something that's less than X dollar amount in implementation minus incentives, it will have a less than 2-year payback, and it's in this region. Search the database, and then it can come back and say, here's the things that others have actually done, and based on real data. So I think the more data we get about this, especially as it's in a large enterprise platform, or Beacon would get across their whole portfolio. I think we give people a lot of visibility into some self-service type things that they can look up based on the parameters that they would choose.
Okay, that's great. Thank you, Chris. And then a couple more questions here that are related. The first was directed at us. Someone made the comment that they heard me say that Urjanet doesn't do any kind of analytics, and asked me to talk about how our data works with systems like Gobi. Yeah, the reason we partner with companies like Gobi is that, we focus solely on pulling together the data. And then it's companies like Gobi that have invested a lot of time and energy in developing analytic platforms like the one that Chris has described, to provide their customers with all the real insights around this energy data. And Chris, this ties into another question that's really posed for you. Someone must have been hitting your website while we've been talking here, because they've asked you to comment specifically on your C-Suite platform. And maybe you can just touch briefly on it and talk about how energy data gets in there, how you set targets for different facilities, and just any other kind of, very, very high level kind of overview of C-Suite.
Well, yeah, thanks for the question. So C-Suite right now has about 300 million feet of real estate that's being tracked on an annual basis. And this includes all asset classes. You'll have hospitality, commercial, retail, industrial. And what different asset classes or what different owners or managers want varies, and the price point varies on what you might track. So at a base case, most of our users want to track certainly the energy and water utility data. Most also are tracking waste data in our platform now. There's a big push for certainly the ESG or environmental social governance components of a portfolio or an owner's information being tracked. So the platform is really meant to be able to cost effectively track these on a portfolio basis and a multi-tiered asset basis. We set thresholds and benchmarks at a system level, things that we would say these are industry best practices per asset class. We'll set them and sit down. For example, we would sit down with an owner or a user like Jerome and say, what do we want to track? What are the goals? Jerome had mentioned the energy challenges. Well, what does that mean within your organization given the hold period? What thresholds do you want to set? And these are kind of triggers that you can set such that as the data comes in, your asset can get basically a score. As you log in to look at your building, it could say, I'm performing as expected, I'm performing better, or maybe there's some opportunity for improvement based on the parameters that were set. But it's easy once you get the data, and what we really do like about using Urjanet is that we're pulling the data right from the utility. And so we have a high confidence in the data, and then we can set those flags to run as soon as we load that data. We can have some pretty fresh analysis presented to the operator at a building, regional portfolio, or sort of an fund level that you could look at this information and start to make some decisions.
Okay, that's great, Chris. Appreciate that very much. And then, Jerome, you might be in the best position to comment on this. Someone in the audience is asking about the best sustainability metrics to be tracking. Can you provide some insight on that?
I would say all of them.
Okay.
We as many as you can. We at Beacon we kind of lumped all of the we call it building performance metrics into three groups: building, environment. Those are some of the items you would see on LEED related to air quality and daylight and views, things where some of what you can change, some of what you can't. We like to understand how we can improve or optimize the environment for our tenants, so that when we say this is our building, they think it's also a clean building, where it's environmentally healthy and using green products and things like that. So environmental within the building, healthier within the building. So there are a number of items a company like Gobi tracks, and we try to track related to really LEED points at this point, because that kind of breaks it down into these little incremental elements. Gobi is actually, we're starting to use Gobi for some of that in our properties, and we really try to look at every single one of them, especially where we feel it is going to optimize the environment for tenants. The second category is cost savings that we look at, and so again, we want to see everything, and obviously we focus more on things where we're going to see a payback both to us and or to the tenants. Recycling, water use, things that are kind of benefiting both the costs in the building, but also, as I said, the tenants. And then the last is environmental impact. We want to have reduced carbon emissions. We want to be using products that are going to have a better impact on the environment. So when we think about what items we want to look at, it's really a combination of all the energy details that we can look at, and then really, I guess, we look at using LEED because LEED has become such a all-encompassing metric, let's call it, or a set of metrics to analyze the property. And ultimately, what we find is, I guess I would add to it, that looking at all of these items allows us to meet with the property management, give us visibility into not just historically when we looked at the financials and whether we've got the right lease rates and the right tenants and they're paying on time and the building is financially sound and all those things. We can now look at a whole other we have visibility to a whole other set of dynamics that we can measure the performance of the operating team by. And the ability to facilitate that by automating it and getting it in front of us and doing some analytics really positions us to make the building a better building, and ultimately when we sell it, to provide visibility to buyers who look at it and say, wow, you got this thing LEED certified 3.5 years ago. What have you done since then? And we could say, well, here's what we've done. We've monitored all these things and we've checked our energy and we've had these improvements, not just an Energy Star switch reduction, but a reduction in energy spent per square foot, or a whole number of metrics that they wouldn't be thinking about, that will give them a great deal of confidence that the building is actually being operated well across all categories.
Okay, that's great, Jerome. And then, Chris, here's a question that's was just submitted, and it's a question about the Gobi platform. The question is, how does the Gobi platform interface with the client's accounting system? Gobi doesn't do bill pay, is that right? And can you describe this process?
Yeah, that's a great question. So at the moment, we're piloting a bill pay process for a couple of customers. So in today's product, we're not handling the financials of the bill pay. So while we're looking to move that way, because we're certainly having customer demand for that, and that's in our product roadmap. In today's world, what we'd actually do is provide one of two ways to handle this. We can provide the workflow management, so we could consume an energy bill from a utility, could be energy, water, could be electric, gas, whatever the bill was, and we could load it past the basic sanity checks in our platform and then present workflow for someone to say, yes, I approve this invoice or not, or this bill or not. And if they want to click into it, they can always get the detail and reference the scanned link to the file and the actual bill itself. This counts for both regulated and deregulated markets. So if you want to look at supply and delivery charge. And then basically our system will automatically send either via, here's the nasty word, Excel. In a base case, you can export to Excel and import into another system if you don't want to invest in sort of a connected infrastructure. The other case is we can send basically the payment record to the accounting system. There's several accounting systems that we can connect to. The other thing is we're built in the force.com platform. So there's a lot of pre-built connections that are already done that we can leverage. So in a lot of cases, something's already been built, and that's precisely why we chose the force.com platform, is that there's a community effect of all these developers, much like the Apple App Store, where someone publishes it and everyone else can license that rather than everyone recreating all these individual interfaces. So there's multiple ways to do it. I kind of mentioned the workflow happening in our system. Most of our clients now are asking for the workflow to be in their system. So we'll load the bill data automatically, which replaces the accounting function from having to do that. Then we'll store all of the information in our system. And what's the benefit of that too is that we're storing a lot of additional information. So as Jerome mentioned, there's a various set of metrics that you track. Well, we'll also pull, for example, we'll push that bill information into Energy Star, and we'll pull back the Energy Star score and the carbon footprint, for example. Well, you'd never send that to an accounting system. So we want to strip the relevant information off of that bill, keep what we need for the sustainability tracking metrics and the energy components, and then send that payment record off to the accounting system. So we've really settled on a mantra, which is this notion of we have almost limitless data available to us, but limited resources to be able to capture it and contextualize it and understand it. So we really want our platform to pull all of this data, and then based on role or function or job need, let's send the right information to either the right system, be it Energy Star or accounting, or present it in a way to the right user such that they can make a decision. So that's really the goal of our platform. And so it's really meant to be sort of this connection point for many systems because there's a lot of different uses of the data.
Okay, that's great. Thank you, Chris. I think we've got time for two more questions here. This first question, I don't remember who made the comment earlier in the session about Portfolio Manager, but the question is, how does Portfolio Manager fall short on the data side, meaning the data it stores is not granular enough? And I can't remember, Jerome, if that was you or Chris that made that comment earlier, but perhaps one of you could respond to this question.
Well, I would respond by saying, I think it might have been me, that when we look at data at this point, we want to look at data that's tighter than a single month by month level of data. We want to be, I mean, we look at data, we're talking about 15, 20-minute interval data so that we can really look at what our property is doing throughout the day. I don't know if I use the word fall short. I think there is an absolute benefit to Energy Star. We love it. We use it for comparative reasons. I mean, there's a number of things that we do that we really benefit from using that type of benchmarking. And there's a lot of, if you look at what goes into Energy Star and the ability to gather data across multiple buildings and the types of analytics they have in there, it also is very helpful for us. But when it comes to understanding the minutia of something that's happening at a building, and I'll give a very simple example that I think everybody probably has taken a look at this point, but is when does your building turn on? When do your systems boot up in the morning? When do you start cooling or heating? Things like that. I mean, those are things that you won't see by looking at an Energy Star score or even the data that goes into that. Okay,
that's great. And then, Chris, perhaps the final question we'll have time for here today is directed to you, and that is, as I look at energy data as the first step in managing costs and reducing carbon footprint, what's next for tracking, capturing, and reporting?
Wow, that's a great question. And it probably is a follow-on from what Jerome was just talking about is operationally, what do I need to capture? And when I look, I was just at a Bloomberg conference in New York. It was probably about a month ago now, but fascinating the amount of information that they're trying to capture about. In this case, it was focused on publicly traded REITs or real estate investment trusts. And they are basically trying to capture this environmental, social, and governance data about your fund or your REIT, such that an investor can say, I want to invest in this particular one because I believe in the risk mitigation and the overall operational excellence in a more sustainable or more sustainably run building. So I'd say in the base case, what we're seeing analysts ask for, and not everyone exactly knows how to compare this data, but the key foundations that people are wanting to track are energy, water, and waste. So what goes into the building, what comes out of the building, how do I power the building? Of course, underneath that is what generates the carbon footprint and sort of the overall footprint of that building. But I think those are the basics that people need to be thinking about tracking. But really, where we're getting asked is how do I, what do I do with that information? So if you look at all of that information in aggregate, how do I score myself? And there's various scoring mechanisms. There's asset level ones, Energy Star lead. There's portfolio ones. We're integrated with a platform called GRESB, or the Global Real Estate Sustainability Benchmark. There's other ISO or Carbon Disclosure Project. So there's various scoring systems, and I think depending on an industry class or market, you would choose one of those scoring systems. But I really think there's this notion of asset level performance, and then how does that roll up and translate into a financial performance of a fund or a company or a portfolio. And so I'd really start to focus, and we're focusing our customers and clients on looking at those things and starting to, one, track them, because historically a lot of people hadn't, and then start to understand and set benchmarks and goals on what to do with that data now that we have capability for capturing it.
Okay, that's great. Thank you, Chris. Well, we've got a bunch more questions we weren't able to get to. So what we'll do is, for those of you that submitted questions and we weren't able to answer them live, we'll make sure we follow up with you in some way. I'd like to thank our panelists one more time for sharing their insights into the world of energy data. As a follow-up to the session today, we'll be sending all of you links to download a few resources, along with a copy of the slides and a recording of this webinar. And be on the lookout for our expert Q&A next week as well. So thanks again for tuning in, and we look forward to speaking with you soon.